section of the journal. Now, as I said, point the camera, and here the camera is pointing at Bailey. He's sitting on the edge. He's bent over the orange sports section, not the blue sports section, because newspapers used orange newspapers paper then for the sports section. And as he's sitting there, absorbed in that, that image is telling us he's not really paying attention to his mother. The writer is not telling us that, but it is being suggested by the image. Now look here, Bailey, she said. See here, read this. And she stood with one hand on her thin hip and the other rattling the newspaper at his bald head. Now, if you are learning to write stories, your teacher will tell you, describe your characters. Let us see what they look like. And what people do often is they start the story and then they have a separate paragraph in which they say, oh, he was bald and he was this and he was that. They give you information. But notice what the writer is doing here. She is making the information part of the action. There is a grandmother, and he's sitting there like that, and she's pointing a finger. Read this, she says, pointing her finger at his bald head. That is how we know that it is a bald head. The writer does not tell it to us. It is part of a revelation of the action. And that is the way. It is so natural, so easy, really, once you know it. But people don't. Even some of your great writers, so-called great writers, people like John Steinbeck, they are very poor when it comes to certain aspects of the form. Now, she goes on here. See this, read this. The emphasis of that action, again, it is how people are, grandmothers perhaps, insisting that her point of view is correct, read this, say this, etc. But even there, something is being shown by the writer that gets to be part of the meaning of the story, as we shall see. Here, this fellow, she goes on, calls himself the Misfit, is a loose from the federal pen and headed towards Florida. And you read here what it says he did to these people. Just you read it. I wouldn't take my children in any direction with a criminal like that, a loose in it. I couldn't answer to my conscience if I did. That is the end of the first paragraph. So what you have in that story, the first paragraph, is simply the presentation of a moment in time in which one person, the grandmother, is insisting upon her son to see this. She is in command. I know what I'm talking about. This is what we should do. We don't want to go to Florida for vacation because a person from a jail has escaped from the jail. That's what the newspaper says, and he would be a threat to us and our children. And I couldn't answer to my conscience if we went that way, she says. That is the end of the first paragraph. Now, as the story proceeds, and of course, as we all know from reading the stories, that when you have in the first paragraph somebody saying that there is somebody, some misfit is loose from the prison, and he will be a danger to us if we put him on the road, we know from that sooner or later these people are going to get the guy and they're going to get it in the neck. We are clever enough, sophisticated enough readers to understand that. And so the writer is building up that expectation, which is nice. And also, of course, one trick that you as a writer have is not only you plant your gun in the first paragraph and then use it later on, but sometimes you plant the gun in the first paragraph and never use it. You create the expectation and the reader keeps on waiting for that to happen. It never happens. That is part of the drama. Again, be truthful to reality. Now, and the next paragraph goes on. Bailey didn't look up from his reading, so she wheeled around then and faced the children's mother, a young woman in slacks, whose face was as broad and innocent as a cabbage, and was tied around with a green handkerchief that had 2 points on the top like rabbit's ears. One long sentence. First paragraph ends, she says, do this, and he doesn't even look. And as she's there, she turns around, and there's the wife, Bailey's wife, sitting there. And she also is not looking at anything. And in that moment, the writer, without telling you anything, presents the image of the wife, the daughter-in-law. And the image is a young woman in slacks whose face was broad and innocent as a cabbage. Innocent as a cabbage? Very interesting. Immediately I see a cabbage. A cabbage has no eyes, no nose, no mouth. It's blank. It's vegetable. It's dead matter. It's not dead, but it is matter. It's been taken out, so it's dead. And the writer is not telling me that this young lady is totally worthless human being. But what I understand unconsciously, that she is a cabbage. She is a vegetable. And as I read the rest of the story, that is reinforced. She never has any life. She just sits there dead. She's going on a journey, she's going on a vacation, but she pays no attention to anything. She doesn't even know her name. And she's wearing a kerchief, a scarf on her head with two points like a rabbit's ears, the description there. Again, the camera is giving us the image. The writer's not telling us anything, but I see the cabbage and I see the rabbit's ears, and she's wearing a scarf, for goodness sake. And later on, she never wore a scarf. There are two reasons why women in that society wear scarves. One is fashion, and I don't think this lady is fashionable. The other is her hair is dirty, and she can't be bothered to wash it. But the writer is not saying that. That is what is suggested by the image. The moral of this little piece is always create the image, and the reader will understand what is going on. Often, you, the writer, do not even know what you are doing. You simply create the image, but there is a certain compulsion that is taking place, and that makes you create that image that is going to create the idea that you hadn't even thought about. It's quite remarkable how these things happen. And then this goes on, I'll read a little more of this. She was sitting on the sofa, feeding the baby his apricots out of a jar. Nice little sentence there. Again, the camera is showing she's sitting on the sofa. We see her. And she's feeding the baby apricots out of a jar. Tiny piece of totally worthless action, but very important. It's a detail. And those of you who are writers, please remember, details is what life is made up of. Life is not made up of grand philosophical statements. It's made up of the fact that I pick up this glass of water and put it up to my lips and take a sip and say, there's always action, there's always some little detail that is the action of existence. So here she's doing that. And I would say, if you're writing, always pause after the sentence, say, what would she be doing at this point? Don't go into 10 pages of description, just give one line, feeding the baby apricots. And so this goes on for a while. Let me just skip this and come to, a little bit more, a little later on. So what this writer does in the story is, in the first page of it, she simply gives you this moment where she's introducing the characters. Grandmother, son, the mother, and there's a baby and there are two noisy and rude children, typical children, very well described, very well presented. And so the next day they begin their journey. So what you have there is a setting up of the scenario, and now you're going to have the drama. And the reason why you should read this story and study it a few times is that it's a perfect example of the well-made traditional story. If you want to write a good story in which whatever's happening is shown, then study this as a kind of a template, and it's a perfect way of doing it. Because from now, the next day when they begin the journey, from there to the end of the story, it's continuous action. It's quite marvelous, the way in which he does it. The story itself, I don't really care for all the drama that takes place, but it's beautifully done. For example, the next morning, the grandmother was the first one in the car, ready to go. She had a big black valise that looked like the head of a hippopotamus in one corner. Big black valise that looked like the head of a hippopotamus. Why does it look like the head of a hippopotamus? Because that was a common kind of a valise in those days. And that perhaps tells you what society these people are from, etc. But remember this, all of us have a great reservoir of images in our minds, which are the details of matter. And when we are writing a story, our mind accesses these and brings them out, and so we put it down there, almost without thinking. As the story proceeds, there are a number of other images of a similar nature, as a similar meaning, animals or creatures like birds who are not really alive. The head of a hippopotamus here is in the design of the valise. Later on we see Bailey wearing a shirt which has birds on it. Then we have somebody else wearing a shirt which has a picture of a stallion on it. Now, if you look at those images, the hippopotamus, the stallion, and the birds of the parrots, you find that you're looking at images to do with freedom, the birds, power, hippopotamus, stallion, silver stallion, as opposed to a pony or a donkey. A stallion is a very powerful creature. So you have images of power that are frozen, that are incapable of any kind of action. And there is some meaning to that in the larger framework of the story. When people analyze stories and discuss them, etc., they realize that the author has arrived at meanings that are profounder than even the author imagined them to be. It's all to do with the images. As the story proceeds, now, when you started your story, you set up the scenario in the first part, and then started the action, which is going to be continuous, and you're going to reach some dramatic moment. But you can't rush it. You have to take your time. And there is a longish passage in any story which I call prolonging the action, because that is the way life is. And in prolonging the action, nothing is happening, and therefore what you do is you simply create something interesting or the other. And if you read the story, you'll find a lot of that interesting matter there. Now, what I want to know is, more people have arrived, and are the three people whose stories I'm supposed to be talking about here or not? Kifa, you are here, right? Are you still here? They're not here. Okay, never mind. We will assassinate them in their absence then. Gee.
What was the story you were talking about, Flann O'Connor's? What's the story's name that we are supposed to read if we want to write it?
Oh, the name, A Good Man is Hard to Find.
A Good Man is Hard to Find.
And read all her other stories too, and she's very good. And read her criticism. Her book of hers called Mystery and Manners, which is exquisitely good. Flannery O'Connor, O''Conner. Now, I'm going to refer, those of you who are coming in, going out, I was sent 3 stories by young writers in this region, and I admire them for taking the trouble of doing so. And I wanted to show them what I thought was not quite right in these stories. And I've been talking in vague and in general terms so far, but the main point I made is that generality, statements, etc. should be avoided. Anyway, here's the story that begins. Long gone are the days when deserts used to be secluded places. Is the author here by any chance? You are here? Now, I hope you don't mind. Where are you? You can't come here? Okay, stay there. Very good. Thank you for the story. And I'm delighted to see young people in Pakistan attempting to write, but you have to learn. And I'm here to try and bring you the good news that it's very easy, really. But there are mistakes here that I think need to be addressed. And I hope you don't mind my being honest with you. The worst thing would be, oh my God, this is a wonderful story, so beautifully written. You should be, et cetera, et cetera. No, that would destroy you as a writer. The only way to grow is to get criticism that shows you what the mistakes are. As you know, and as everybody else who's tried to write knows, that when you write, at first you're thrilled by what you are about to do. The first few paragraphs come in a moment of ecstasy almost, and you begin to have the glowing feeling inside you that, oh my God, I'm a genius, and I'm going to be so successful, and the Booker Prize is waiting for me, etc., etc. That's fine, and I approve of that because that gives you a fertile kind of energy with which to proceed. And as you write the rest of it, you get more and more excited, more and more thrilled, and you find yourself making these grand statements, and you think you're really, really very good. And not only are you a genius in literature, but you're also a great thinker. So there's a wonderful glow that takes place. And then the moment when you finish it, you feel, yes, great, I proved it, it's great. And it takes 5 minutes after that, and you realize what a piece of nonsense it all was. And you say, oh my God, and sometimes it doesn't take 5 minutes, it takes longer. You make the mistake of showing it to other people, and they point out a few obvious errors, or you make the mistake of having it published. And then, of course, you're done for the rest of your life because it is there to condemn you, etc. And that is why you write your second story, because you want to prove that you're not that bad. So I'm going to inspire you to write many more stories. Now, what do you want to call you? Taimur? Taimur. Your first sentence again. Long gone are the days when deserts used to be secluded places. Now that is a grand statement. Long gone are the days when deserts used to be secluded places. It invites that kind of parody. And also, basically avoid a generalization like that, especially at the beginning of a story. And also, is the statement true? Have you been to all of the deserts to make sure that the statement is authentic? That is no defense, my dear fellow, because you can't say it's not me, it's my character. I once was talking to, I was living in London, and an English writer friend of mine had a play, and I said, well, we were very frank with each other, and I said, well, it was boring. And he said, yes, of course it was meant to be boring, it was all about boredom. I said, no, we've had plays about boredom, and Chekhov's Three Sisters, partly about that. But it's interesting. You have to make it interesting. And that phrase, by the way, make it interesting, is straight out of Henry James. Read Henry James's essay called The Art of Fiction. The Art of Fiction was written in the second half of the 19th century. It is the starting point of understanding what writing good literature is. My phrase starting point is perhaps a bit wrong. But you have to remember that the novel form was taken to be a secondary form until recent times. And Henry James is the starting point of taking it seriously. Anyway, in The Art of Fiction, Henry James says the only consideration, not consideration, his word is something else, we have, only obligation a writer has is to be interesting. How he is interesting is up to him or her. So you have to be interesting. And also, I know it's in the character's mind, but if you say all deserts, or imply that all deserts used to be secluded places that they no longer are, I think if you go to the Chihuahua Desert in Mexico, it's pretty secluded still, so be careful. And then you have a full stop after places, and Zarak Atisham thought bitterly. Now, it may be the character thinking, but there should be a comma after places because it is that thought that he is having. Otherwise, what your statement means that he was, his thinking was bitter always, and that is not what you meant. Then in the second paragraph you say, he was waiting for the traffic lights to turn green in the middle of the desert. Now, I don't know, what the image I have is could have been me. Well, we know that. That is implied by the action, so don't say it. And I think the problem with the stream of consciousness, once you start that, either you write the entire story that way or not. And because if you don't, then it becomes intrusive, and you want to avoid it. The entire area turned into a picture of chaos immediately. The ambulances as well as the police vans had arrived. The road was blocked due to the overturned car and the truck that were in no condition to move anymore. An officer was shouting on his megaphone, "This is all right, but it is reported journalism. Show the action." Instead of saying there was chaos immediately, show the chaos. Let us experience it, let us feel it. Without the experience, the reader is lost. And then he turned the car around, got off the main highway and pulled over near a roadside tavern that he had crossed just a few minutes back. His hands were shaking. He waited for a few minutes inside the car, trying to muster enough guts to step out and walk to the small wooden door. Finally, he lifted up his head from the steering wheel and entered the inn. He felt weak in the knees as he approached the little wooden counter at the reception. The high stool near the counter creaked under his weight a little as he sat on it. Very good, that. Be attentive to sounds. You know, in descriptive language, people tend to concentrate on the eyes. But smells and sounds and taste are also important. One of the things all writers will tell you again and again, exercise all the senses, appeal to the senses, and everything will be all right. He looked at his hands. They had stopped shaking. One of his hands had a long, deep scar on it in the middle of his forefinger and thumb. That refreshed the image of the woman's deformed, torn body and the painful expression on her face. The word refreshed is not quite right, but never mind. Otherwise, that is a very fine paragraph, one of the best in the story. And why? Because